welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're joined by a wonderful person who's going to share with us firsthand research that he conducted in the lives of the world's top achievers. Some of the strategies of the top business people from Nike, Reebok, Fruit of the Loom, Federal Express, as well as United Airlines and Microsoft are going to be part of a strategy that he shares in his newest book, Personal Power Mastery. In addition, our guest has also been the producer and director of 3 out of the top 10 personal development movies ever made, as well as a producer of the Opus featuring Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen, among others. He has also authored 3 books in the Guerrilla Marketing series and is creator of Personal Power Mastery, which I mentioned earlier, which is rated one of the top personal development programs in the world, providing powerful tools to companies, individuals, and students. So if you're someone who's looking to change your life, looking to ascend to higher levels of mastery, accomplishment, and financial attainment, well, you might want to listen to what our guest has to say. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest and author of the book Personal Power Mastery, Douglas Ramiran. Douglas, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. It's very exciting.
I'm excited to be here.
You should, it's very exciting to be able to share something that you're very passionate about. And I think one of the biggest things that I've seen consistently when I talk with people as I'm out there about goals, things they say they want to do, is the first thing they don't have is the passion for it. And they also feel, well, I also have a belief that perhaps I don't have the talent to go the direction I want to have. What are some of the things you see in people when it comes to moving forward and achieving the kind of results and things that people are actually most interested in their lives?
Well, I appreciate you bringing up that question. In fact, this idea of passion and also purpose are things that we actually run into quite a bit. In fact, a lot of people struggle with either finding their passion or purpose, or once they found it, how do I make a success out of what I really love and really want to do? And what I found is that the reason why people struggle with either of those 2 questions, either finding their passion or purpose or making it work for them, really comes down to one thing. We as human beings, and the more that I've studied this, the more I found this to be true, we are seekers after, let's call it significance, right? We want to mean something to someone. A lot of our feelings of self-fulfillment, of self-worth, of self-confidence come through our contribution to the community and society around us. So one of the reasons why I think most people kind of struggle is because either they can't see how they're giving to other people, or their passion or purpose is very self-centered. In fact, it kind of reminds me of a quote that Warren Buffett once said. Warren once said that what we love about ourselves is our hobby. What others love about us is our business. And so when we are looking to really be of contribution, I think that this idea of passion and purpose, once we've kind of discovered what we love and what we feel our purpose is, it really becomes easier to attain when we recognize how that really fits in with the passion and purpose of those that we want to serve. And where those 2 things overlap, meaning our passion and purpose and their passion and purpose, where they overlap is where we're going to find that it's easier to become successful. Because if you think about it, everything in life that we want, whether it's money, whether it's freedom, whether it's opportunity, whether it's relationships, whether it's our health, they all come as we sort of coordinate, or how should we say, transact with another individual. You can't, for example, have money by yourself. You can't have a relationship by yourself. And so I think it's really important that we recognize where our passion and purpose overlap with others, and it appears much more easily when we can see that.
I like, here's a quick interesting story when we can kind of move in this direction, and that is, and you talk about this, and it was really unique to see this in a book that you read about in personal development, and you talk about the power of perception. Now, that's something you don't see a whole lot in personal development books, and believe me, I've probably waited for most of the Library of Congress when it comes to these. And I think a lot of us have, too. And here's a unique perspective, a perception, if you will. I sometimes find, and this could have even been my own case, that a lot of times we go through these books, let's say that you're somebody who's decided to join a direct marketing company, and I'm sure that most of people listening have said, yeah, I kind of dabble in that and it just didn't work for me, but what we truly look for through these books, I believe, is a way to ease the pain of the actual process to get us to where we want to go. We want to find a shortcut. And I'm certain that through, your experience perhaps, and certainly working with people over the years, that you found probably that same thing. What is a way that I can ease my pain from the change that is required for me to move, for one, change my perception of what I think about what I'm about to engage in, but most importantly, my belief in the outcome of what it is. Now, I like the perception, the idea of perception.
Well, you know what? You said something really kind of cool just a second ago in what you're talking about. You talked about direct marketing and just people that kind of dabble in that kind of thing. The thing that caught my attention was that word dabble. And this is why people have pain. I honestly believe it, because if you're fully committed and you're fully in, you're going to fully get the results. If you're just kind of partially there, you're always going to kind of be walking on that razor's edge, and you will get your backside sore. Let me put it kind of this way. The universe is an echo chamber, and if you approach something with hesitation or with fear or with doubt or anticipating pain or anticipating failure, that's exactly what you're going to get, right? But if you get fully involved, I'm not saying that it's always going to be easy, but now you know why you're there. Now you have a mission and a commitment. And I'm a firm believer that when you have a goal that is specific and clear, it's much more easier and near. And that's the problem with most of these, kind of self-help books that are out there is this idea of perception. They also paint that it's going to be, a super easy shortcut and, a super easy way to do it. Well, I'm here to tell you that the truth of the matter is yes, your goals are closer than you ever thought possible. I believe that everything is closer. The problem is that most people don't understand that as part of this perception, we create that by how committed we get. And if we choose to see something with the lens of, it's not going to be possible or, it's going to be a lot of challenges, and well, that's exactly what's going to show up. What we see is what we create. And, as you're talking about this idea of perception, one of the things I think is absolutely incredible is I'm a big fan of watching magic and illusionists. Guys like David Copperfield and Penn and Teller and this gang. And the truth of the matter is what we see is not the reality, right? Like we see what they want us to see. We see what they've composed. And I think that that's the way it is in our life. We decide what the illusion is going to be ahead of time. And most of the time we make it far worse or far more challenging or far more difficult than it is. And in psychology, there's a principle that goes along with this. It's called investment bias. And what that basically means, and let's just maybe take it, the easiest way to describe it is like a success in business or finance kind of point of view, is many people self-sabotage themselves because they just don't feel like it should be that easy. They feel like they've got to pay a higher price, or they feel like they've got to put in more work, or they've got to do more to qualify for the success that they want. So even when it arrives, they won't accept it. And I think that's a very difficult and challenging sort of perspective to have. And once we can eliminate that and really see that, some things are a lot more accessible than they are, and we start recognizing that, the universe is here to serve us, and we get fully committed, we see that things will begin to arrive a lot easier than we ever anticipated.
Now, I would like to share a personal story, I think, that really fits in line with what you're talking about here, and that was when I first began radio almost 20 years ago. And I remember there was a time that I walked into a radio studio, and I just happened to show up at a time the station's general manager was there, as well as the producer. Of all people, of two people, to have these people right there in front of me, I was kind of surprised. Nobody else was in the building. And as I shared with them while I was there, and it was something that actually, believe it or not, took me a lot of courage. And this is up with scramble with sometimes your perception, your idea of what you think a situation is going to be really changed. And when I had told them why I was there, they said, well, why don't you go ahead and create a resume? I mean, I know we realize you probably don't have a lot of experience, but you really have a pretty good voice for this. And I've heard that from time to time, but I didn't totally believe that. And to me, that wasn't really the important thing anyway. But I found the ease with that situation surprising. And this is literally what I said to them. It's kind of interesting how easily you've made this whole experience be. I kind of expected barbed wire and machine guns. Literally, that's what came out of my mouth. Why I would have that perception of this experience, I don't know. Now,
well, again, like we're saying here, people often anticipate that the price is much more high than it really is. That's exactly what happened to you there.
Exactly. And furthermore, so when I finally decided to pursue it, it was actually about a year or two later. I actually
Oh,
went in, and the next thing you know, I found myself doing the job where I was sitting in front of all the people that you see in the major networks and so forth, and I was interviewing them on a live show that I'd created, and I couldn't believe that one as well. Like, I didn't expect it to be that easy. But even so, I believe the ease comes with finding that passion where you belong, but the real work comes in adjusting the habits that can create success in a particular endeavor that you're pursuing. You get there quickly, but then you realize there's those other things you didn't see before, and that's where the real change and the exercises and the strengthening come.
yeah, I would agree with you. I think that that's definitely a massive part of it. And, in addition to habits, I think one of the things that most people really don't recognize is that habits gel together to form patterns. And if you think about it, everybody in their life has a series of patterns. And sometimes these are good, sometimes these are bad. Obviously, the bad habits are very clear and obvious as we observe the lives of others, but we often don't see them in our own lives. And, I guess just as an example to kind of share what I mean by that is, I'm sure your listeners, especially, over 50, they've got enough life experience that they've seen either family members or relatives who've been through the pattern of a bad relationship. They exit it. They start another bad relationship. They exit it, and another bad relationship. Or people who do the same in their finances. They make a little bit of money, and it's gone before, they can build anything with it, right? So
Right.
it's, these patterns and these habits are really what form our total outcomes in the end. And we need to really understand that we have control over those things, especially when we understand how they're created.
Now, you talk about, for instance, that people will spend time when it comes to, let's say, deciding on a particular goal or a way they'd like to go. They spend more time managing it than actually just moving in pursuit and getting results. What's going on there usually?
Well, I think a lot of times, like I said, with this idea around clarity, I think a lot of times the problem is clarity, and that's why they are kind of, managing the day-to-day. And as long as they're busy, right, doing something, they feel like they're making progress. But that's not always the case, right? In fact, a lot of times the best progress is made when we set something up and walk away, right? Like if it's set up correctly, it'll operate itself. It kind of reminds me of something that someone once told me, and I apologize, I can't remember who it was, but he said in the future, the best businesses in the world will actually have three components. It will be a computer, a person, and a dog. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he goes, well, the person will program that computer, and then he'll walk away, and the dog will just make sure he doesn't touch it, right? Because I think the problem with most of us is even when we get success kind of moving and going, we get fidgety and we have to come back and do something, and ultimately, it's like building a house of cards. The more we play with it, the more likely it's going to tumble. And I think a lot of people just really don't know when to sort of, set it up right and then let it be for a time, right? And even if there are adjustments to be made, perhaps they need to be smaller adjustments and not massive overhauls once we sort of get that direction correct.
Now, earlier as we were talking, you were talking about how when people can move into a position or a way of seeing that if they begin serving people, from that place of their special talents, then that's when they'll find much, much greater results. And in your book, you talk about how values dictate boundaries and influence your decisions. Let's give some clarity on what that means.
Well, that's quite a powerful discussion, in fact, and I don't know how much time we have here, but a couple of things. If we even just start, first of all, let's start with the idea of values, right? Like a lot of times, and maybe the easiest way to kind of explain this is if you can imagine in your mind a teeter-totter, like a seesaw, like what you've got at the kids' play parks. On one end, you've got your values. On other end, you've got your motivation. And when the value is low, okay, so imagine the teeter-totters now, the value is the big heavy boy sitting against the ground, right? And on the other end of that, high up in the air is motivation. So what I mean by that is that when your value to do something or to be involved in something or get committed to something is low, it really requires a lot of high motivation to get going. In fact, we see this a lot in corporate settings when people are assigned quotas or goals or told what they need to do and what they need to achieve, it often takes a lot of motivation to get them going. In fact, I've even seen where people have been threatened within an inch of their job, or they've been told that they're, not going to get a promotion or a raise or whatever, and so that spurs them on to this hard work. Now, if the teeter-totter goes the other way and it's something that they highly value, then, of course, the motivation to do that is very, very low. And so we see that all the time when people really have something that they love, they almost jump at the chance or volunteer immediately to be the person that will support that activity that is in line with their value. And so I think, if we're looking, first of all, in this idea of motivating others, and all of us have, people in our lives that we need to either motivate or influence. In fact, I've got 2 grandkids that we're the primary caregivers now. So I've done it with my kids. Now it's on to these guys. I recognize that until you can really understand what they value, it's difficult to get them to do things without some form of motivation, right, like high motivation. And so this is really what this idea, I believe, of finding it within ourselves, too. What do we really value, right? And when we can see how the activities in our daily life are connected to what we value, we'll find that things like procrastination and avoidance and even fear and challenge, those things all kind of start to dissipate, and we have the strength and the motivation, like I said, to be able to now pursue the things that are most important to us.
Very well said, actually, because a lot of times I don't think people, what they want to see is they want to see the experience of the end result. And once they get there, they realize, well, this isn't exactly what I thought it was, and that's when you get, you're working from the perception of this is what I thought I wanted versus what you truly want. And I believe that when people can inherently discover their natural values, their desires, then things are much, much different. That's where we get to a place that things seem to become easy. That doesn't mean that you won't have obstacles.
It's interesting what you said, because even in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he said something really profound. He said, most people climb the ladder of success to find it's been leaning against the wrong wall. And so when people ask us at our seminars, how do I make sure I'm leaning against the right wall, and what's the definition of happiness, right? Because that's success. Success is happiness. And, you can define what that looks like to you, whether it has something to do with a financial status or relationship status or whatever. But our definition of happiness is this. It's that when the choices that you're making and the consequences that follow bring you peace, then you're happy. And I think that this is interesting because a lot of times we read a definition that I believe is only half correct. It says happiness is a choice. We've all heard that, right? Well, yeah, it begins with a choice, but it ends with a consequence. It's not just enough to make a choice and say I'm doing this because I want to be happy, or my choice is to be happy. It's the consequences as well that we create, which are, again, in line with our values. So if somebody asks what's the definition of success, I think it needs to have a very specific to it. Like I said, a goal that's specific and clear becomes attainable and near. So it needs to be specific, right? You can't create financial freedom by just simply an emotional experience. You need a real number, right? But you also need the feeling component that measures with your values. And if those two things are set up in a way that's pleasing to you, again, your ladder's leaning against the right wall, well, then you can create that success a lot easier.
Now, how did you decide to move this direction with your life? What was going on there?
Actually, it was funny. I fell into this totally by accident. This could sound crazy. Like, the way that I was raised, my father worked in construction. My mom babysat kids in the home. We were lower middle class. Obviously with a father in construction and my mother having to babysit, well, it just tells you that they were struggling to make ends meet. They were stuck in what I call the poverty pattern, which means we work and then we pay, we work and then we pay, and we never get ahead. And, everybody has heard this saying, work smarter, not harder. And my parents did too, and they encouraged me to do that as well. But their idea of working smarter was actually to work more. And so that's kind of how I was raised. And the way that I kind of fell into this is at the time I was in college, I took the job selling pest control door-to-door in California. And I was broke. I had student loans. I had massive credit card debt. I had, tuition bills. I had, you name it. I was really in trouble financially. And so I just thought if I could work more and, make some money doing this door-to-door sales stuff, I would hopefully find a way out. Well, to be honest with you, it didn't work out. Door-to-door is pretty tough. And those in your audience have ever done door-to-door sales, you can totally relate to what I'm talking about here. And so, I was about to quit. I was like ready to throw in the towel and try something else. And I think a lot of people do that. If one thing doesn't work, they bounce quickly to something else. And so they never really get the chance to see if it's going to work. But before I quit, I had a very wise family friend who said, I think you need to read this book. And he gave me a copy of a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And for those who are not familiar with the book, kind of what Napoleon Hill did is he went out and he interviewed, in his day, this was 1930s, he went out and he interviewed more than 400 of the world's top achievers in his day to find out what the keys of success were. And he interviewed people like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, the Rockefellers, the Wright brothers, the Wrigleys, and all kinds of other really successful people. And so when I read that book, obviously it changed my thinking. This was my first experience with personal development. And I really began to realize that I had more power within me than I had at first realized. I had more ability to affect my situation than I had given credit. And so one of the things that I did at that moment was I also decided I would like to go out and interview 400 world's top achievers like what Napoleon Hill did. And so I started to do that. And as you mentioned in my intro, by the time I was done, I had met, one of the founders of FedEx and the former CEOs of Nike and Reebok and Fruit of the Loom and Christian Dior and Jordache Jeans and Southwest Airlines. And I mean, the list goes on. And that's kind of what gave me the foundation for truly understanding success. So in other words, I did read a lot of the books on success, but I didn't base my teachings on that. Instead, I went right to the source. I thought that would be smarter. And now when I kind of look at what's being taught in the world today, I can really see who's sharing a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of someone else's material versus someone who's actually either experienced success firsthand or studied with someone who's experienced success firsthand. And, when you meet 400 of the world's top achievers, it's kind of funny, actually, recently at one of my events, I had a lawyer that was there, and he said, if I had one witness on the stand to establish a fact, that's pretty good. If I had 3 or 4, that's even better. If I had a dozen, it's totally irrefutable. But you have studied 400 of the world's top achievers. The information that you have is second to none. And it's funny because a lot of the major media outlets now refer to me as the modern-day Napoleon Hill, because since the times of Napoleon Hill, I don't think anyone's done as conclusive of a study on success firsthand anyways, as I have. And, one of the other things I think is kind of just neat about this study is, number one, we included more kind of success definitions than what Napoleon Hill did. He studied business leaders. I included spiritual leaders. I included celebrities, athletes, people who'd made their money on the internet, people who'd, done amazing, feats like climbing Everest and stuff like this. And so it was a really more broad point of view of what success is. And then the second part that was really different than what we did is since the days of 1930s, a lot has changed in terms of what we understand for psychology and brain science and how we make decisions and how we stay motivated and human persuasion and, neuroscience and all these really neat things. And so I started bringing in a lot of those tools that are contemporary to us to really understand what was going on. So my work certainly validated Napoleon Hill's original work, but it expanded on it in such a way that I think makes it more accessible for people today.
Now, tell us what might have, if you can remember what was going on in your mind when you decided to start this particular pursuit.
Well, if I can be quite honest about it, I think what really inspired it in the beginning was jealousy. And I know that sounds crazy, but here I'd read all these things about what Napoleon Hill had done and who he had met. And I thought in the back of my mind, when someone makes a movie, there's a lot of scenes that never make it into the final cut of the film. And so I was like, what kind of stuff did he learn, for example, from Thomas Edison that never made it into this book? Or what kind of stuff did Henry Ford say that also never made it into this book? And so I started to study with that in mind. I wanted those hidden secrets. How could I find out what was never mentioned in the original study? What was missing? And then naturally my first inclination is as I read this, and one of the other books that I originally read too is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Both of those books really talk a lot about that those that we spend the most time with as our influences really have a deep effect on us. You've probably heard it said that, your income, or let's call it your lifestyle even, is a median of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I'm going to suggest that that's not just people, that's all influences. I mean, if you're watching a lot of TV, not that you're going to become like the guys on Dances with the Stars. You're not going to start dancing great, but you're actually going to become like everyone else that watches TV, right? Or if you're, spending all this time on social media, again, those are your peers in that circumstance, right? So you've got to be very, very careful on these influences that you bring into your life. And so that was kind of the beginning foundational steps of why I decided to do this. And then naturally, kind of what happened is I started, quite frankly, making a heck of a lot of money by having these people as mentors, friends, and contacts. And I soon started to get invited to speak and to teach people about what I had learned from some of these top achievers. I had no idea, and it wasn't on my radar to ever become a speaker or a teacher, but I just love doing it so much. And the results that we've seen in people's lives, it's really made a big, big difference.
Now, was there ever a point when you were pursuing this goal that you felt intimidated, especially from someone who you were about to meet?
Oh, 100%. In fact, you know what one of the scariest ones was? You probably wouldn't even think of this as being scary, but I remember the first time that I met Richard Keel. And some of your audience may know who he is, some may not. Let me give you context. You remember the James Bond movies, The Spy Who Loved Me?
Right, I remember him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
he played Jaws.
Like 7.5 feet tall. And so he was one that scared me right away. Not only was he a bad guy in those movies, but as a kid, I don't want to think I had nightmares about him, but I certainly had, challenging feelings towards him. And so when I met him, it was frightening to me. But what was kind of interesting is he actually later became a very, very close friend up until the time of his passing. And we even co-wrote a book together. He was one of the most giving, neatest men that I've ever met. Just incredible stories. And naturally, he had had connections with so many amazing people through his life that it was wonderful to get to know him and hear his stories. So that's one of that. But I had those kind of experiences happen also with business leaders too, like people that were, obviously people of massive stature. But the thing that I noticed after a while is, after you've done even 10 or 15 of these interviews with these legendary people, you start recognizing that they are just people and that they're also very wonderful people. And I've often found that this idea that, rich people are greedy and stingy and blah, blah, blah is totally, absolutely false. In fact, I found that those who have abundance in their life, whether it's in finance or any other area, are typically kind, giving, and abundant in every other way. And all of them were gracious with time for me, and many of them are still even friends today. And we, it's almost like some of these people either kind of became almost like either uncles, aunts, or grandparents to me because they were so excited about what I was doing, and they saw value in passing on their legacy, so to speak, to other people. So, at first I was intimidated, but after a while, I was actually very excited when I would have the opportunity to meet someone like this, and it would actually be one of the highlights of my life at each time I'd meet one.
And I like the way you had just presented that story because I have experienced the same thing in my life, and what's really wonderful about that is how I share those same experiences with other people. And here's what I mean by that is it doesn't really matter what your pursuit is, what your goals are, your lifelong dream. It really doesn't matter what that is. What matters is your perception on what you think that's going to be versus the reality. So you want to challenge your perception of what that is. Now, it doesn't really matter which endeavor you're pursuing. You'll find that pretty much the challenges really are the same. Now when you talked about how, Richard Kiley was one of these people that you were intimidated by it, as you talked with him, you realized this is just a person here, that's just as warm and kind and so forth. And wow, that kind of breaks that perception of what I thought here.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way when I'm out there and somebody shares, for instance, there's a young girl that I know who is interested in working in the wedding planning business. And I said, really?
Okay.
I said, well, I happen to know somebody who actually not only does that for a living, but he has a business that I think would be a wonderful connection for you to have. And the first few things that came out of her mouth, well, I don't know if this, that, and the other, are going to work out and so forth. And I said, you haven't even talked to this person yet. That's going to be your biggest obstacle right there is connecting and sitting down and interviewing with this person to see what are your dreams with this. What is it, the direction you want to go. This is somebody I felt that you should connect with. And I said, you've already just taken yourself out of the game before you ever got started.
Well, yeah.
And a lot of people do
again,
that, don't they?
I think that you've hit a nail on the head there, too. Just again, back to this idea of investment bias. People think that they've got to pay a big price before anything will be available to them. And that includes even a conversation, right? Like they feel, and I wonder if it's maybe even just a worthiness issue that they feel as though maybe they're not worthy to have a conversation with someone who's achieved something. And I think that's a big challenge. If we recognize that, actually, let me put it this way, because one of the top achievers that I interviewed said it to me this way. I was talking to him once about the principle of humility, because I felt like, wow, if I've heard conflicting views. I've heard that if you want to be massively successful, you got to have somewhat of an ego to believe in yourself and to really, put yourself out there. But then I've also heard that people say you've got to be humble. And you know what his answer was? And I now believe this is the best definition of humility. He said humility isn't being weak. Humility is believing that you're great, but it's also believing that everyone else is just as good. And I think that is an important definition because, yes, we've got to believe in ourselves, but we've also got to believe that everybody else is just as good. Mm-hmm. And I think whenever we place ourselves sort of in comparison to others in terms of, my results are not the same as their results and I'm not as good as them, I think we're doing a disservice because we're also, you've heard the idea of you don't want to compare apples to oranges. And I think the problem is it's even bigger than that. You're comparing apples to bananas. So you're saying that what's important to me is, measuring it against what's important to someone else. And I don't think that that's fair. In fact, it's funny. One of my really good friends, John DiMartini from The Secret, is in our film The Treasure Map that we did, and he said that everyone is wealthy. Our wealth just appears in what we value most. And I think that's really important. So if you look at somebody who's, for example, created $1 billion company, well, that's where their values are, right? Versus somebody who's, let's just say, for example, they've now got 50 grandkids and everybody's still married and happy. There's no divorces. There's no domestic challenges there. Well, that's where what that guy values, right? And so we each create what we value most. And for us to put it in comparison to someone else is not fair to anyone involved, right?
And that's so true. And this is one of it's really enjoyable to know, for instance, that I've spent the kind of time in the industry that I'm in, broadcasting. My main reason, for being in this is as a kid when I used to listen to disc jockeys like Machine Gun Kelly or Wolfman Jack, for instance. I said, that's something I want to do. It just seems like a lot of fun. You get it. Yeah. See, they gave the illusion to me they were everywhere. We're down here in Los Angeles, down at Long Beach for going on for the Grand Prix Raceway. And you had this, this perception that's where they were. They were always at the party, so that's why I wanted to do this. And I'll tell you, when I first started to pursue this, and it was actually in my mid-20s, and I still put it aside, so it wasn't until I was actually in my early 30s that I really started pursuing this dream of mine, of all things. But what was funny is I went to a broadcasting school, and as they were trying to encourage me to attend the school and why I should do this, to go get a job in radio, is they had given me a list of people who had successfully been trained by its professor, I guess, if you want to call him that. And I said, well, this is kind of neat. Can I go ahead and have this list? And so they gave me a copy of this list. And there were a lot of names on there that I recognized that were with the local stations and so forth. And I actually took it to the next level, and I found out a way to contact these people directly. And at the time when I had a roommate, and he says, this is really a trip getting phone calls from people that, I just seen in the news, on a television broadcast that are calling here for you saying, I'm returning your call. I know what it's about. Let's see what we can do about scheduling an appointment so we can talk about this, because my pursuit was to do informational interviewing to find out more about the industry, right? Instead of going directly to the school and spending money and going that route. And that's exactly what I did. And just like you were saying earlier, you're really tremendously amazed that when there's a particular pursuit, and what I've discovered as well, there are a lot of people that will help you to get where you want to go. So if your first thought is you're going to become a self-made man or woman, that's a thought you need to get rid of entirely because nobody gets there on their own.
Well, it's interesting that I just recently wrote a book for the Guerrilla Marketing series called Guerrilla Millionaire, Tactics of a Self-Made Millionaire. And one of the first things I point out is there's no such thing as a self-made millionaire. They're always group-made. And if you think about it, like I said earlier about this idea of meeting other people, there's no transaction that occurs by just one person, right? You can't even print money on your own in your basement by yourself because you need somebody who's going to have provided the paper, the printing machine, etc. But if you're doing it legally, not printing money in your basement, but you're actually going out there meeting with people, you also need others. Everything requires a transaction that involves other people. Now, I'm here to say to you also that if you think of all the major accomplishments that have ever been done, like Sir Edmund Hillary climbing Mount Everest or Neil Armstrong on the moon, or they all have had massive teams. Now, again, we don't really care who gets the credit. Like the guy who carried up Sir Edmund Hillary's bag up the hill and all the Sherpas that went with him, we don't know their names, so he got the credit. And Neil Armstrong got the credit for walking on the moon. But each one of those guys had a massive team. So my question is how can you assemble your team supreme to support you in what you're looking to do? And don't worry about who gets the credit because the truth of the matter is you will. You will, right? Yeah.
Now, I would like to focus on opportunity because there are a lot of times people will beat themselves up as they're pursuing their dreams where they feel like an opportunity presented itself and they kind of shut the door on that and then they look back and regret. And this really stalls a lot of people, if not it just downright stops them altogether. And to realize that if you were to continue to move forward, yes, perhaps you missed that opportunity, but what did you just gain from that? That's the wisdom to know it was in front of you in the first place. The wisdom to know what particular actions did I take that led me to that. And then finally to ask yourself the question, is it possible opportunity will strike again? What are your thoughts on that, especially after the interviews and in your own experience?
Yeah. Well, there's two thoughts that come immediately to that. One of them is that some opportunities actually only strike once, and some you must create for yourself. In fact, it kind of reminds me of what Bruce Lee said, and I'm totally paraphrasing. But he said, I don't wait for opportunity, I create it. And I think that that's really important because opportunity is such a rare thing. Like one of the people that we had a chance to spend some time with was Oprah Winfrey. And Oprah, as you know, is a very busy lady, and if you want to get a chance to meet her or spend time with her and that opportunity comes up, that will be a lightning strike. You will only get that once, so you better take advantage of it. And so I think that we've got to really be aware that not all opportunities are, number one, created equal, and not all appear at the same time and same frequency. So you've got to be ready to receive them when they come. The other thing that's interesting, just speaking about opportunity, and this is maybe a weird way of looking at it, I had somebody come up to me one time because I do a lot of coaching when it comes to finance and investments and money. And I had somebody come up to me and said, what's a good investment? And the truth of the matter is that's two questions, really. It's not one. What they asked me is, where can I find a good investment? That's what they said. And that's, again, two questions. And the first question is, well, first of all, what's a good investment for you? Because what everyone's trying to achieve could be dramatically different. Like, again, maybe I'm looking to do it to create a passive income stream. Maybe you're looking to do it because you're looking to increase your net worth. Maybe you're looking at it because you're trying to defer some taxes. So you're actually looking for a way to have some money absorbed into it. Maybe it's a long-term play. Maybe it's a short-term play, right? So your definition, again, of what opportunity is really depends on what you're looking for. And then, again, that idea of where you're going to find it, well, that's a whole other thing because depending on what you're looking for, you'll find it. Let me maybe share this. This is a bit of a segue on this, but it's so interesting to look at it this way that we need to always define certain things before the real answers appear. When I first started in this idea of making my own businesses and trying to, get ahead in life, I was still doing, of course, all the interviews with the 400 Achievers. I still am even interviewing them when I can, but I had one gentleman that was interested to help me with a business I was looking to start. And he says, why don't you build a bit of a business plan and come and see me for lunch? We'll go for lunch and I'll take a look at this thing with you. So anyways, as I got there, I set the paperwork down, which I had been working on all the night before. I had it all this nice coil-bound color graphs, charts, everything. Like I spent a lot of hours doing that. And I set it down, and he didn't even touch it. He said to me simply, "What are the transactions?" I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" He says, I say, "I've got the marketing plan there. I can tell you who my key customers are. I can tell you what we're going to sell." And he stopped me again. He says, "Where are the transactions?" I said, "Well, again, I've got everything that you need right there, the marketing plan, blah, blah, blah." And he goes, "Here's the deal. You don't even know what your marketing plan is until you know what transaction you're trying to get people to do. You don't even know who your customers are or what you're selling until you know what kind of transaction you're looking to do." And it went on and on that you need to find the foundational answers before you can skip ahead to the other questions. And I think that that's a big problem with most people is they assume that they know what they want. They assume based on, either what they've seen other people apparently enjoying or what society tells us we need to do or what, and it comes back to that thing we were talking about earlier, these values. Until we really decide what it is that we value most, it's really hard to decide what we should acquire or what our opportunities look like, right? We don't just pursue an opportunity for the sake that it appears. It's better to find the opportunities that are going to suit us based on what we value most and what we're trying to achieve. I mean, the problem is in life, so many things are coming at us, so many opportunities. It's almost like there's a room full of plants. You've got one glass of water, good luck. And if you try and water everything, it's going to all die. But if you can pick the one or two that are most valuable to you, then you're going to succeed. Then you're going to be happy. And by the way, I know I'm kind of going on a bit of a rant here, but there's something else that was mentioned to me by one of my current mentors. And I still actually meet with a mentor every single Friday. I do a lunch meeting with him. I select my mentors carefully. This is a guy who does a bunch of real estate trading in my city. He's worth about $700 million. And I was meeting with him the other day even about this idea we've all heard. Every success book on money talks about it. They say, pay yourself first. And he said, that's totally untrue. It's not true. If you want to have a happy life, a successful life, a sustainable life, you can't pay yourself first. That's greedy, that's selfish, and it's self-centered. And then he used the example, he said, if you were on a boat, let's say the Titanic, it just hit the iceberg, everybody's loading up the lifeboats, and you decide to get on first, well, how's that going to work for your family? How's that going to work for your business? How's that going to work for your life? Like, everybody else will look at you as the most selfish person, and soon you'll be alone in that lifeboat. So he says the way that you need to look at paying yourself first is find what gives you the most value. Again, back to this idea of value. And that's how you pay yourself first, is you load that in a lifeboat at the beginning. So in other words, my value boat would look like this. I'm going to put my wife and kids and my grandkids and the rest of my family, as many as can fit in that boat. Then I'm going to put in what I call my survival tools. So if I was going to wind up on a deserted island, I'd want a guy who can help me build shelter, who can help me hunt, who can help me fish, who can help me feed people, and maybe get an SOS signal out. In my life right now, that's my businesses, and so that's my golden goose. I'm going to put that in. I'm going to take care of my customers and make sure they're happy and supported before I put money in my own pocket, right? And then whatever else I decide to put in the boat before me, the stuff I really want to have in my life goes in before me. That's paying myself first, taking care of first things first. So I hope that kind of makes sense, right?
Well, it makes a lot of sense, too, and it's funny that you mentioned two things. A, you were talking about investing, what should I invest in, and then B, you mentioned the Titanic. Well, here's a unique part of the Titanic story. Now, we all know the captain went down with a ship. We do know this, and we expect that probably. But what a lot of people don't know is the actual president of the company that built the Titanic. He was actually on board. And what had happened is when they were finally rescued, is the ship that he went on, he immediately went down to the Master Chief Doctor's office, and that's where he stayed for the rest of the trip. So unfortunately for the captain, he went down with the ship, but he went down with honor. But this person, when they arrived in port, was tremendously dishonored for his cowardice. And never worked in the industry again.
Yeah, and I thought he eventually committed suicide as well. Did
he probably did, yeah. But I just remember when I was hearing about that through the documentary, like, oh my goodness, the last person, he's representing the company. Imagine what the perception of that company is now. But that's the one thing now on the investment side of things when we were talking about opportunity and how sometimes it comes like lightning and it strikes. And you've got a choice to make. And again, as I was saying, well, opportunity comes again, especially as you put it into a position to say when you're pursuing and creating opportunity. Bruce Lee was an excellent example. In fact, there's a wonderful biography called Bruce Lee, A Life that I just did an interview on. You should read this guy's life. It's pretty amazing what he did. But
Absolutely.
The other one was Warren Buffett. Now, I've actually read his biography, and I encourage everybody listening, if you want to be successful, read biographies and you realize a lot of people actually have a hell of a lot of struggles to get where they are. And you realize, well, if they've been through that, then I can do it too. But anyway, that being said, one of the biggest things Warren Buffett had been criticized even to this day was that the investment community had decided that he had missed the opportunity when it came to investing in Intel back in the early 1970s. His simple reason was, look, it's technology. I don't understand what they do. I won't invest in it. Okay? Now, that just makes sense. Now, you're going to try to tell a guy that has become at least the world's richest man, if not once, twice, that he was wrong for missing that opportunity? Really?
Certainly not.
No, exactly.
Certainly not. And again, like I say, your values come first, and that's the other thing about values. And if you can define what you value, it becomes a lot easier to identify your opportunities. Here's the problem. When somebody comes with an opportunity, the response most people say is, well, let me think about it. You know what? The thinking should have been done ahead of time. And that's the difference between a successful person and a non-successful person. A successful person already knows what they want, so when the opportunity appears, they're ready to go.
Right. I know it's there's a quick funny story on that one too. Is there was a friend of mine that got involved with sort of a AAA sort of a service, emergency roadside, but it also has a prepaid legal attached to it. And it was funny being with her one time as she was talking with somebody about what the benefits were for a very low cost, ridiculously low for what you were actually getting. And the good component was the prepaid legal part. It's to help you keep your driving record clean. Originally started for truck drivers, for instance, because that's their career. And this person took a look at it, and of course she puts him to a buying decision. And what he says is, why don't I go ahead and talk to my wife first? And I looked at that like, well, there's your typical blow-off, right? And this is what she said without blinking an eye. Is that what you're going to tell the police officer while he's citing you a ticket? Well, hold on a minute. Let me talk to my wife first. Too much.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Now, finally, what I'd like to talk about is this, okay? We decide there's a desire, a goal, or perhaps, there's something in our lives that we want to pursue. As we talked about earlier, a lot of times people will overplan. They want the best of this, or they want to ensure everything's going to go right, so they don't take action, or at least most of the action they take is not useful action anyway. And then we talked about things such as opportunity, changing perception. But the big thing now is that there's a crossroad that most people won't think about. You talk about this quite well in your book, and that is motivation and momentum.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, there's a big difference between the two, in fact. And I think if you look at it very carefully, like one of the questions we always ask people is what's more difficult to get? Or what's more important, maybe is a better word, getting momentum or motivation, right? And I think that the thing is that most people assume that it's motivation. I just need to get motivated. The truth of the matter is motivation is such a fleeting thing. Motivation, requires a recharge every single time. Now, I'm not saying it's not important, but I'm saying once you get momentum, it also conquers fear and it keeps you going. Like, again, I love this idea of us talking about investments for a minute because that's one of the biggest scary things for me in the beginning. I wanted to learn about investing because I'd recognized a lot of the top achievers that I had interviewed basically made their fortune in investing or in real estate or business. So I had a lot of fears that, because I'd never done that before. So how do I do this? But what I found is as soon as I had made my very first investment, which I in fact even had to borrow money to do from friends and family, but as soon as I started receiving a cash dividend payment, I was now on a roll. I now had momentum. I could see how it worked. I got excited and I was able to continue doing more.
Well, and you also experienced that it was possible. Before it was just out there, but once it's like passive income for us. When we started to experience it, you realize, man, I want more of this. And that's your momentum
Yeah.
and motivation altogether.
Well, yeah. I mean, the momentum is what follows after the motivation. And, I think for me, I had to get motivated enough to take a leap of faith. And with that leap of faith, then I was able to start engaging in the momentum of the process. Once I started seeing that it actually worked, then it was perfect, right? Now, one of the challenges that I think a lot of people experience is you're not always guaranteed a win on your first time out either. And so
like I said, read biographies. You'll see that.
Exactly. But I guess, what I'm saying is that you've got to understand the long play. And, I made some dramatic mistakes in my investing career as well. I mean, I've lost a lot of money at times, but thank goodness, I'm in it for the long term. I have a long-term play, and so therefore the momentum is able to keep going, right? And, they talk about this taking 30 days to create a habit and all these things. I believe that, yes, with some things that's definitely true, but I also believe if you value something enough, like if it's high enough on your radar, it can become an instant habit, right? It can become something that immediately you decide that's what I'm going to do and that's what I need to do, and you start doing it, right? Like one of my hobbies, and I'm so glad that we talked about Bruce Lee, but I am a mixed martial artist. I do competitive mixed martial arts. My specific art that I enjoy passionately is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I found that when I first started with that, it was painful. There was a lot of training that I did that, quite frankly, I didn't really feel very comfortable about. Getting choked out and having, joint manipulations and arm bars. I mean, it's definitely not something you look forward to every day. But what I found is because my value to do it was so high, my interest in that was so high, that it actually became, something that I could easily get committed to. And then as I got that commitment down, the habit of showing up at the gym became easier to do until it became now momentum. I just do it because that's where I need to be, right? So at first it required a lot of motivation, but my value was high, right? And then, once you get into it, that momentum, and then you start seeing progress and you start seeing skill development, or in the case of the investment, money back, it becomes easier when you start seeing the fruits of your effort.
Yeah, in fact, a wonderful quote from Bruce Lee is, "Do not pray for an easy life, pray for the strength to endure a difficult one."
True.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing stuff that we're talking about here today. Again, for those of you just joining us, we're talking about the book Personal Power Mastery. Our guest, Douglas Vermeeren. Douglas, is there a website people can find out more about your work and how they can get the book, things like that?
Yeah, actually, probably the best website is personalpowermastery.co, and through that site, we also have a lot of links to some free materials and resources for people. We've got a lot of social media things we do, like we've got social media groups on Facebook and stuff where we actually share a lot of free videos and insights, articles, interviews. Some of the top achievers that I talked about even come onto the group there. But you can access it all through Personal Power Mastery, and like I said, there's a lot of free stuff that will help you get to the next level in a real quick fashion.
And most importantly, don't sit on the sidelines. Get in the game and play, but you'll realize that you also got to get out there and practice as well. And along with practice comes those times that you just don't succeed. In fact, when you think about, for instance, legendary basketball great Michael Jordan, you take a look at his career stats, what was he, like a 44% shooter? So that means that maybe he'll make it, maybe he won't. Well, boy, when he made it in some incredible games, didn't he?
Well, also, if you look at the volume of opportunities he took, that's also what made it. Not everyone's a winner, but actually, let me put it this way, speak about investment again. One of the things that my mentors taught me is something called a 5-to-1 ratio. So whenever I'm investing in certain things, is there the possibility I'm going to make 5 times my money on it? If there is, I invest, because then that allows me to actually make 4 mistakes for every 5 times I invest, and I'll still be ahead.
Absolutely. It's been a wonderful time talking with you, but I'd like to ask you this one question and see how this one works here, and that is this. So as you've interviewed all these people, and as you've actually put not only what you have learned from them into play, but also pursuing things and learning, now, would you say that if you were to say to people, if someone else can do it, so can you. Would you feel that that would be a good theme in your book and the way that you live life?
Yeah, I do believe that it's true, but I think we just need to kind of preface that. You know, you've heard the saying that says anyone can do it, or anyone can be rich, or anyone can do it. The truth of the matter is not anyone can. And there's two prerequisites, I believe, that a person needs to be able to do that. And they're not hard. One of them is they need to have, again, an understanding of the correct pattern, the patterns of success. Because a person who just says anyone can do it and proceeds willy-nilly without any skills or ability, they're never going to get there, right? So that's important, that we be teachable and that we understand that we need certain lessons to make it work. The other prerequisite, I think, is actually the most important one, and that is a factor of willingness. You see, anyone can do it, but not everyone will. You know, many people, look at someone, again, like a Michael Jordan and say, wow, I could be the best basketball player in the world, and then they sit down on the couch and watch TV. That's not what it's going to take to become like Michael Jordan, right? And I guarantee that in the future there will be someone that will break all his records and get to those high levels, but it will be someone who is definitely willing to do what it takes.
Well, there's certainly LeBron James. He's pretty much almost there.
There you go.
But like
and
I was saying,
his records too.
Yeah, what I was going to, back to the question again that you need to ask yourself, and this is a question sometimes I'll even ask myself or I'll suggest to others when they're facing adversity on their way to their life path. What I said was, if someone else can do it, then so can I. And that's a much different question or statement than anyone can do it when you think about it. So that's what I was asking
definitely
you.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And definitely true. And I think all success starts with a commitment and a willingness. It's one thing to say, yeah, I could do that too, but until you say, I will do that, and you actually put in the effort and you do the time and you get yourself out there, it will never really happen. I love that you just talked about spectators. If you think about it, a spectator is somebody who watches other people do it. In fact, I've got a T-shirt. It's really hilarious. My wife bought it for me. It says, I saw it on TV. I'm pretty sure I can do it. There's a lot of stuff that we see that until we put in that practice that you're talking about and that effort, everything that we learn in life comes to us in something called the J curve. And that means that it's the shape of a J on how we learn it. So in other words, at the beginning, we're going to stumble, we're going to fail, we're going to put in all this effort, and soon, even like riding a bike, soon we get the balance, and then we've got the ability to become very proficient. We can go no hands, we can go off little ramps, we can do all kinds of tricks, right? But until we are willing to get off the couch and actually get on a bicycle, we'll never, ever learn how to do it.
So the key word here then, and leaving our listeners out there, is action. If you don't take action, you're just never going to know. It's really.
And I believe that deliberate action is an even better word.
Absolutely.
A lot of gurus out there talk about massive action. Okay, that's true, but we can all run in the wrong direction, right? So
we can massively do everything that doesn't even get us to where we're going.
Exactly. And we see people around us all day who are very busy, but they're not making any progress. So I'm going to suggest it's deliberate action. And Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, said there's 3 ways to learn wisdom. 2 of them are okay, which is reflection and hard work, or experience. But the final one of imitating someone who's already done it and then innovating on that imitation. So in other words, making it personal and adapt it to you. That's the quickest way to get to success. Why reinvent the wheel? And this idea of people saying you got to think outside the box to be successful, I disagree. I think you got to think inside the right box. You got to figure out the box that has the stuff that you really want and then go think in that one. Don't invent or think outside the box. Go find the right box. And when you've got that, all of a sudden all the answers are there.
Agreed. Douglas, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. And before we leave the listeners here, what is the website place that people can find out your work?
personalpowermastery.co. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We've got to take more massive action. Get this world to be a better place. That's what we're here for. Thanks again, Douglas, for being on the program today.
Thank you.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us again. The title of the book is Personal Power Mastery, and our guest and author is Douglas Vermeeren, and you can find out more by visiting personalpowermastery.co. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.